Good Ceann Corla. I suppose as I was preparing my few notes here today, I had hoped that the debate would be constructive, positive, and all those adjectives that we're used to hearing from some members in the House. But I think I have to reference Deputy O'Riordan's contribution in particular. For a guy who comes in here professing that he wants to de-escalate the situation, to be constructive, and to use all those positive connotations, then to launch into a 5-minute tirade of abuse against the Minister and cast aspersions on the Junior Minister as well before he decided that he would up sticks and leave the debate and leave the room. I think that hypocrisy needs to be flagged here today, and the people at home watching this on TV perhaps can see that for what it is. He didn't even give the Junior Minister the opportunity to respond to the aspersions that he cast against her, and I think that needs to be called out, that hypocrisy. I would welcome Deputy Gannon's contribution. It was much more measured and constructive. Can I just initially begin by commending both ministers for the attempts that they have made. It hasn't been easy. It's obvious that there's been difficulties, but the best way to resolve those difficulties is through engagement and debate. I would just like to say that, look, by my very nature, I'm a school teacher. I obviously have a lot of friends, family, relatives that are in the education field, just like the Minister. And people are concerned. There is anxiety, and there's a heightened level of anxiety for obvious reasons. It's the middle of a pandemic. But that said, we need to do the right thing here, which is to get back to the table, as the ministers have done today, and engage in positive discussions with the various unions. It's incumbent on all of us here, from all sides of the House, to comment responsibly and maturely in this debate, because, as other members have mentioned, any negative I suppose contributions are likely to heighten and inflame and escalate the difficulties that we are having at present rather than resolve them. So I think just a bit of calm, and people need to just be measured in their contributions, and I think that would be appreciated by all sides. Minister Madigan, I just first have a number of questions I would like to ask to you in relation to special education. Could I ask you briefly if any consideration has been given to local arrangements being made in the interim in situations where schools, employees or education providers would like to assist a family of a special education student in getting additional help in the interim? Would allowances be considered for this type of an arrangement if agreeable to all parties at a local level?
Minister Madigan.
Thank you, Deputy, for your question. Obviously, and thank you for your non-adversarial approach and constructive approach in the Dáil here today, which I do think is important, whatever has happened in the past, that we move forward in a constructive way. The NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, does a lot of work on the ground in relation to children with special needs, and they have their CNOs, the Special Education Needs Officer, who's a very close liaison with schools and indeed with families, and I think that's probably the best way to approach when you're talking about a local approach. But I would suggest that if you have a particular family in mind, they get in contact with a CNO in the National Council of Special Education, who will actually appoint them one if they don't have one already, and that's probably the best way, because this is what happens in the community. They're the people really on the ground. There are obviously other interim supports that we're providing, online supports, and as I said in my earlier contribution, any type of distance learning is really not adequate and is really suboptimal for children with special needs. We really want to and still want to have them in person and in an in-school environment, because that's the best way to teach them. And it can be difficult for families to manage to give that teaching without an SNA who's present in the home environment. So I think that's probably the best way to deal with that, Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Minister. And my second query is just in relation to school transport, because as I'm aware, it has informed some of your negotiations with the unions over the last few weeks. And I suppose I still have concerns in regards to school transport. And I can highlight one specific case in my own constituency where 3 schools are together on one campus, and different groups of students attending those 3 schools are all mixing and congregating on the one bus. And I would hope that clarity could be given to Bus Éireann in that particular case, that that practice can't be allowed to continue, and I suppose where it is highlighted, it needs to stop. So I just have a question in relation to school transport, and I suppose how we're going to get that back up and running when we do go back to resuming schools. And just my third query then, Minister, is in relation to a special needs school in Cork, which I'm grateful that you have acknowledged that there is a need for a new special education school in Cork, and I understand that there's been investigations conducted by one education provider into a house, into Montanati House in Cork North Central, where we have a long waiting list for children that are waiting to attend a special education school, and I'm just wondering if the Minister is aware of any update in that regard, because I'm fully conscious that we're here tonight talking about the need for students to return in the next few weeks, special education students to return to school in the next few weeks, but there are currently 67 children in Cork City and County, in the greater Cork City area, that will have no school to go to in September. So I would just ask the Minister if she has any update in regards to the special education school that's proposed for Cork City.
Sounds like a good topical issue, Deputy Minister.
The Deputy and I have discussed this particular dearth of provision in Cork on previous occasions, and I can get you a written reply to your query, Deputy. I know that in Cork we are doing a considerable amount of work and plan a considerable amount of work this year, because Cork is one of the areas that is most affected in terms of a lack of special class places, indeed special school places, as well as South Dublin. As you know, there is a mechanism under Section 37A of the Education Act which I can consider for these areas, but I'm reluctant to do so because, again, when we're talking about collaboration, we always try to collaborate with the schools themselves in terms of providing places, particularly if there's an existing school. I'm aware of the issue in Montanati. As I said, I will give you a written reply in relation to that. In relation to your query about transport, obviously infection control measures will need to be put in place for transport when it resumes. Obviously, children with special education needs don't necessarily have to wear face masks if they're uncomfortable doing so, but obviously adequate PPE is provided for the bus escorts in terms of school transport. And there obviously is as well social distancing on a school bus, and that was another benefit of having just special education as a priority when we're talking about bringing them back into school, because there is that social distancing, so there's no congregating of parents or anything like that. I mean, what we're talking about is like 4% of the education system in its entirety. It's only about 18,500 children, and there's none of this fear of parents congregating outside the school, because many of these children, as you correctly point out, will be availing of school transport. So obviously we have to ensure that the buses are clean and that they're sanitised adequately, and that the bus escorts have their medical grade masks, and indeed the bus driver wears their masks, and that these are worn even when they're waiting for the bus. So that is something that we've always been vigilant about in the department. They're always monitored, they're always checked to ensure that they're not substandard and that they provide a safe environment for these children where they're travelling to and from their education setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy